Today I want to show you a very small mod that, in my opinion, makes a huge difference in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 and maybe all OpenXR games in VR. This is not about more resolution, more FPS, or a visual filter. This is about something much more important in VR: depth perception, 3D presence, and how the world actually feels inside the headset. And before I explain the mod itself, I want to give proper credit. This is an OpenXR Toolkit mod. OpenXR Toolkit was created by M Bucchia. Even though the project is no longer actively developed, it is still one of the most impressive and useful VR tools ever made for OpenXR, in my opinion. Now, this specific mod is called 3D Depth Boost by PrimaShock. So what does it actually do? In simple terms, it changes the stereo projection relationship between the left and right eye views. That means it changes how each eye sees the scene, and that directly affects how your brain reconstructs depth, volume, and spatial separation. The reason this works so well is because depth in VR is not only about image quality. It is also about the geometric relationship between the two eye views. When that relationship is adjusted, nearby objects can feel more separated, more solid, and more physically present. The cockpit gains more volume, instruments feel more tangible, and the outside world can feel more layered and three-dimensional. And this is also why reducing the field of view can make the depth effect feel even stronger. When you reduce FOV, the image is effectively framed in a tighter way, and the stereo differences between the two eye views can become more concentrated and easier for your brain to notice. So the 3D effect can feel stronger, more obvious, and more intense. In other words, by narrowing the viewing angle, you are making the spatial cues stand out more. That does not mean lower FOV is always better. It just means that a reduced FOV can increase the perceived depth effect. But this also doesn't mean that the screens won't be filled, meaning less physical FOV. It acts like a zoom effect maybe. And in my experience, the result is dramatic. This is one of those changes that can be hard to show on a flat video, but inside the headset, it can completely change how VR feels. Now, I do want to be honest about the downsides. This is not going to be perfect for everyone. If the effect is pushed too far, it can start to feel exaggerated or unnatural. Eye strain can appear. So my recommendation is simple. Take it as an experiment. Try it carefully, compare it to default, and pay attention to how the cockpit, terrain, buildings, and nearby objects feel. For me, this tiny modification changes VR in a huge way. It doesn't add pixels. It doesn't magically fix performance. Or maybe yes, if you crop the field of view with the advanced tool. But it improves something that matters, even more in virtual reality: presence. And for me, MSFS 2024 in VR is just not the same without it. If you want to install this mod, first download the DLL file from the link in the description. Then go to your OpenXR Toolkit folder, which is usually located at. Inside that folder, you will find the original file. Before doing anything else, make a backup of that original DLL, copy it somewhere safe, or rename it so you can restore it later if needed. Once you have your backup, replace the original file with the modified DLL you downloaded. Then launch your OpenXR game, in this case Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. It should work there, and it also worked in other OpenXR games I tested. Once you are in-game, open the OpenXR Toolkit menu. I highly recommend changing the shortcuts to Control plus the arrow keys, because it makes navigating the menu much easier in VR. From there, first go to System and check Override Resolution. Set the value you want, whether that is 100% or a higher supersampled value. Remember that I have an RTX 5090. In this test, I'm using the Pimax Crystal Super Micro OLED, and with this mod, I can't complain about VR anymore. It is super real. Then go to Field of View, select Simple, and try 95% or 90%. You may notice some distortion, and that can be normal depending on the setup. You can also use the advanced FOV tool to crop the image more precisely. This can also improve performance. And then comes the important part. Under Appearance, you will find 3D Depth Boost by PrimaShock. This is the setting that changes how depth is perceived in VR. It changes the stereo projection relationship between both eyes, which changes how your brain reads volume, distance, and spatial separation. That is why the effect can feel so dramatic. Start with 0 and go up until you start to feel the eye separation. Your eyes will adapt to the new projection. Closing the menu helps. And when you reduce the FOV, those stereo cues become more concentrated, which can make the depth effect feel even stronger. So start carefully, compare it to default, and pay attention to how the cockpit and the world outside actually feel. That is where this mod really makes its impact.